Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, October 31st. Happy Halloween to everybody out there. Hope you're having a good one. We're going to do a little trick-or-treating lately. Had fun going around looking at Halloween decorations. I keep doing that. Halloween decorations last night. A lot of fun ones out this year. Looking forward to going out with the kiddos. We're all dressed up as Dragons Love Tacos. That is our costume this year. If you know that children's book, it's a lot of fun. All the kids love it. We are going to be taco-loving dragons, having a nice... Katie's made some great tacos for dinner tonight. Looking forward to that. Hope you're going to have a fun one if Halloween's something you celebrate. Let's see, who do we have in the house? Lynn Schilling is here. Steve Horrell. Phil Hall. Winston Munn is here. Patty Arbor. Shelly Kay. Jamie Thomas. Brian O'Sullivan. Hey, Brian. Christina Nueven is here. Danette Bermia. A lot of Arcadium. Good to see you. Dee Coleman is here. Kimberly Gibson-Tran. Nancy Sabanik. Brian O'Sullivan, I already said. Dick Westheimer. Hey, Dick. We got Tara Meslick-McMahon. We've got Shape of Soup. Rose Lennard is here. Bryn Pope. Lori Flanagan. Just scrolling down. So many wonderful poets in the house, as always. Faye Srala is here. Tom Barlow. Mary Keating. Sharon Ferrante. Haikuist extraordinaire. Shauna Bowling is here. Holly York. Phyllis Sherritt. Katie Scruggs Galloway. Mark Grinier. Mary Lisa. Dieter Minish. It's good to see you, Mary. Lisa Seidenberg is here. Tim Campbell. All right. Chelsea McClellan. Noah Dreshak. Okay, so we got a great group of people, as we always do. And, of course, lots of people watching on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. And we're going to do something a little bit different today. Normally, we do, the critiques, and we're still going to do some regular critiques. But I thought I'd try something else. We're struggling with an issue now. We're getting so many submissions in. There's a big backlog on the critique of the week. And figure out how to go through poems. Because we can go through maybe like 6 submissions at the absolute most, a week. And a lot of times we're saying the same things over and over again. We've been doing the critique of the week for about 7 years now. And it's always been a problem where, a lot of the poems have the same issues. And so what I thought we would do is start out with a kind of general look, and then I'm just going to refer a lot of people to this video. And so if you're watching, if you got a notification that your poem wasn't discussed directly on the critique of the week, but you should refer to this video. This is going to be a helpful episode. We're in the first half or so. We just talk about poems generally and the things that make them tick. And what makes... What we always, it's sort of a summary of what we always talk about on the critique of the week, so we can go sort of into more depth with other poems at other times. Also, if you're watching right now live and you have a poem in the queue, the first person I see mention that fact, we will go over that poem later in the show. So if you've got a poem in the queue, let's see. Danette Bermia does. Okay, there you go. From the end of March. Okay. So Danette's got some way back and long ago. Sorry to make you wait, Danette. I did not realize that. So we'll do Danette Bermia's poems as well. We'll get to anybody else too. But so what I did, and this, we'll see if this is maybe controversial at all, but I used ChatGPT to make some sort of generic poems, okay? And so there's generic poems of 2 styles about the same topic. That's what we're going to do. And I it was a detailed prompt, so it sort of hit all the notes that I wanted to hit here. And we're going to talk about these poems sort of generally, because these are things that just happen all the time in poems, and just really basic workshop advice that people just need to hear. You need to read more poems too. That's always an important aspect of it. If you want to be writing poems that people love and share, it's important to read poems. Find the poems that you like. Find the poems that move you, and then think about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and then repeat that. Okay? So we are critiquing the machine today. So Kimberly Gibson-Tran wants to know, what prompt did I give it? I asked for, well, I don't want to give it away because it was a long prompt to get the stuff in here that I wanted. But I asked it to write a free verse poem and a formal poem about an abandoned bicycle. And that abandoned bicycle is going to symbolically represent loneliness. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. And we have 2 poems I'm going to look at. And so we don't have to sort of pull out any poems Because we love everybody. We want everybody to improve. We don't want anybody to feel bad or anything. We just want people to learn how poems work and how to make them better. So you get your voice and your story out there. I mean, we love everybody. Everybody is unique and a special individual with a really unique, interesting perspective. And getting that out there, getting those stories out there, your perspective is what we want to help you do. And so what I'm going to do here is look at some generic perspectives, and we'll see what goes wrong and how to improve these poems, okay? So the first one is this. And again, I prompted a ChatGPT to write a poem about an abandoned bicycle and the poet's own loneliness, okay? So here's the free verse version of this poem right here, The Bicycle. Okay. The bicycle. I saw a bicycle today, abandoned by the side of the road. It made me think about loneliness, about how people leave things behind when they no longer need them. The seat was torn, and I felt torn too, because I know what it's like to be left somewhere, still capable of being useful but unused. The chain hung loose, like the way connection can slip away when no one oils it anymore. I stood there for a while, thinking about how sad it was and how I am like that bicycle, waiting for someone to notice I could still take them somewhere. And so that's the poem. I told it to make short poems so we wouldn't go. And exactly. So Tom Barlow says that was the first thing I wanted to make sure it did, was telling, not showing. Okay. So we have, the poem is The Bicycle. And Shave of Soup says gross. Yeah. So I saw a bicycle today. That's the first line of the poem. And right away, we don't really get any detailed description. And Brandon Sutton says, I wonder if ChatGPT would do a good job with a poem prompt like find poems like this. If you put in a poem you like and want to find similar things to read, I'm sure there's a lot of great uses. And it's getting scary how good it is at writing pretty decent poems, too. I saw Richard Kraljic on his Facebook page had a really long post about a detailed prompt he gave it to write a fake poem and then make it seem even less fake. And it was scary. But anyway, the point is this, I asked it to make a typical poem that we see in submissions all the time. And the first point that Tom Barlow pointed out already was the show don't tell aspect, which is the thing that you hear constantly in a creative writing workshop. And show don't tell means let us see the bicycle, let us make the leap to what the meaning is. Don't tell us what the meaning is. So the poem here is really sort of crashes and burns with this line, it made me think about loneliness. That's sort of the conclusion you want to get to, maybe. Also, it has the conclusion up front. The idea for this poem isn't, I saw a bicycle on the side of the road. It made me feel something. I'm not sure what it was. I want to explore that. And that's really how you should approach a poem. But instead, it's, I saw this bicycle and it reminded me of loneliness. So you have the idea first off, and it's said first off too. But either way, you don't want to know what you started with. You want the journey of the poem to be an actual journey. And that's the main thing that makes it feel like a journey for us readers, and that makes it a poem we want to read and remember. And so, So don't tell us how the poem is supposed to make you feel or how it makes you feel. Don't tell us how to react to the poem. So you want to present something so we can see and hear and feel and smell and taste it and be there, reliving that moment or whatever it is, and then we come to that leap. We make that connection, and that becomes a journey for us as well as you. So the main thing here is show, don't tell. So here, I saw a bicycle today abandoned by the side of the road. So we have it abandoned by the side of the road, but it's a generic road. There's no details about the bicycle. We get no description. It's just the concept of bicycle. And then we get in right immediately into the feeling that it evokes. It made me think about loneliness and how people leave things behind when they no longer need them. And that could be one of the things to think about when we say show, don't tell, is you're kind of like if you were summarizing a poem or summarizing a story. If that's all you're doing with the lines that you're writing, that is telling rather than showing. You're telling us what the poem was about, what the feeling was about. We want that to be evoked. So that's the first thing. Now we go longer. The seat was torn. I felt torn too, because I know what it's like to be left somewhere, still capable of being useful, but unused. So we get a little bit of description, but there's nothing unique about description again. We have the bicycle is very generic, the road is generic, the seat is torn, but we don't get to see the seat at all. We don't know what it really looks like. We just know that it's torn, but it's this, amorphous description of something that we can't actually see. Like, you don't see what's torn if it's not described at all. I felt torn too. I think that's not a bad spin on the word torn, because I know what it's like to be left somewhere, still capable of being useful, but unused. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to read some of the comments too as we go. Yeah. So Brian O'Sullivan says, the "and I felt torn too" really hits over the read even more than stanza 1. Trust the reader. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But see how we get no details? There's nothing actually evoked. It's a description of the emotions supposedly that we felt when we saw this bicycle, and that's kind of all we have. There's actually no tangible. The closest thing is that torn seat, and we don't actually get to see it, because I know what it's like to be left somewhere, but we don't get any kind of story about, if this poem spun off into, I know what it was like to be left somewhere. I was left alone at this place once, and this happened, and it becomes a chance to turn somewhere else, then that can be a useful line. But just saying that I know what it's like to be left somewhere and keeping it general, we just don't care about that aspect, because it's just it's just telling us what you feel like. Still capable of being useful but unused. The chain hung loose. So we get the chain hanging loose. It's sort of like the seat torn. There's no actual description, no metaphors used to describe it, no way to make us see it more clearly or get any kind of more concrete sense of what the chain is like. It's just a generic chain again hanging loose. That the generic descriptions are very commonly a problem in poems, like the way connection can slip away when no one oils it anymore. And so again, we have this metaphor, simile, like the way connection can slip away when no one oils it anymore. And again, it's not describing the scene or any kind of depth about the feeling. It's applying, again, what you're trying to tell us to the image. It's just telling us what the poem is about, once again. It's saying the poem, which is what I told the poem, I told to the, prompted the software to write, was to write a poem about a bicycle standing in for loneliness. And it's saying this aspect of the bicycle is standing in for loneliness. It's just telling us again, over and over again, it's telling us. I stood there for a while thinking about how sad it was and how I'm like that bicycle. And so now it pushes the telling even further to say it's not just like loneliness, it's my loneliness that this bicycle is. And how I'm like that bicycle, waiting for someone to notice. I could still take them somewhere. Okay? And I think, yeah. Let's see. I'm just trying to read some of the comments here. Yeah. Yeah, take a question. So is this mercilessness how we really want to comment on poems written by real people? Yeah, I mean, we don't. That's why it's ChatGPT writing. But the thing is, the point of this is getting the details out and having yourself be surprised as you move through the poem. Showing what's going on is what really matters. I want to take another look at the other aspect of this. So, oops, hang on. Uh-oh. Where did my... Give me a second, because I had... Let's see, can I think I accidentally deleted this one. Okay. Sorry, bear with me for 1 second, because I had a second poem. And the second poem is this. So I did the same kind of thing. Okay. Well, this is screwy. Hang on 1 second. Let me pull up the actual file. 1 second. Here's the other poem that I asked it to write. And this was asking it to do the same poem a poem where a bicycle stands in for loneliness, symbolically. And this one, though, I had it do in rhyme and meter. And so this is the other thing that comes up all the time in submissions. If your submission is rhyming, and here we go. This is the lonely bicycle. Okay. The lonely bicycle. Beside the road, a bicycle stood, its frame still strong, its purpose good, but no one came to ride away. It waited there another day. The wheels were still, the spokes were bent. It seemed to wonder where time went. Its chain hung slack, its seat was torn. It dreamed of roads it once had worn. And as I passed, I felt it too, that empty space where someone knew the way things were before they fade, the way all joy must be mislaid. Okay, so this is a typical of a certain kind of rhyming poem that's submitted. And of course, not all the submissions coming here are rhyming. And it's maybe a third of the submissions to Critique of the Week, maybe less than that. But when they do rhyme, the issue is usually this. It is having the first rhyme that you think of be the one you go to. So if you hear the word stood, you go right to good. If you think of the word way, you think day. I mean, they're rhymes that are completely unsurprising, and the rhyme is pushing the poem forward, guiding your next thought. And the problem with that is you're not surprising yourself. In the same way that with the first version of The Lonely Bicycle, we already knew that the bicycle was going to stand in for loneliness, and we told us that up front. It said, it made me think about loneliness and how people leaving things behind when they no longer need them. In the same way, this knows what it's doing because the rhyme is what's generating what it's doing. But no one came to ride away. It waited there another day. If you're writing in rhyme, you have to be using surprising words to rhyme, and using that rhyme as a tool to push the poem forward into surprising places. So in the other poem, in the first stanza, we already knew what the poem was going to be about. We were told what it was about. The author knew what the poem was about, and the poem didn't go anywhere from there. And the same thing happens with a lot of rhyming poems where you're moving through just trying to fill in the rhyme, and you end up having the poem sort of create itself in a ChatGPT-like way without surprising yourself. And the rhyme and the meter should be used as a tool to go surprising places that you don't realize you're going to go. And to do that, you have to don't pick the first word you think of when you're trying to think of a word to rhyme. Pick the third or fourth or eighth word you come to. Use slant rhymes. Mix the syntax across lines. Vary things up a lot. And that's just a main thing that happens in so many poems. And so we want to see just more complicated rhymes, but everything pushing you toward surprise, pushing you toward your own realizations as you go through the poem. And I think that's the main point we wanted to make. Let's see. I'm going to look at the comments again. Yeah. Exactly. So then I'm going to take this. So now we have these two examples of poems that just don't work in very generic ways. And it was they were inspired by this poem here that does work. And the whole point is to see the difference, okay? And this is George Bilger's Abandoned Bicycle. And this is a poem about the same topic. This is from his book, Cheap Motels of Our Youth. It was a Rattle Chapbook Prize winner. George Bilger is a wonderful poet. And we'll see why as we read this poem, okay? Abandoned Bicycle. So this is the positive example of how to actually do poems and make them work and make them come to surprising moments and be memorable and make it be things that you want to keep reading and read again. Abandoned Bicycle. A bicycle, a nice one, has been locked to the lamppost all summer and fall. Tires gone flat. A congregation of leaves worshiping the wheels. On the brake levers, and the tiny bolts that held the seat exactly where someone wanted it to be, rust is constructing its sprawling embassies. Maybe a drunk drifted over yellow lines, a clot formed in the thigh and moved north, or somebody just got sick and tired. Anyway, the bike is waiting. Its metals gleam urgently. Soon the scavengers will come. The petals, unable to live without each other, will vanish into a fresh new marriage. The seat will disappear into a seat-shaped abyss. One night, someone will help himself to a wheel, not quite a bicycle, but a start. And the bike, like an abandoned person, will become a clock calibrated to measure the precise duration of loneliness. And so note the differences here. The level of detail that he let us think about the scene and the bike before we got into what the poem was actually about, and how he let us make the leaps of understanding. He didn't tell us what the poem was going to be and how he felt about it. He could have said, I came across a bicycle, a nice one, and then I felt this. But no, he let the scene build. He took his time, lingered over certain details, described them in fresh ways. And that's what makes it a good poem. And I think the thing is, it's really hard, unless you read and look at poems like this in detail, to see the difference between an idea that's a really interesting idea, that created a real emotion for you as a human being living on this planet and experiencing life, and then making it a poem that functions and makes us feel connected to that idea. And so George does that in so many ways with this poem. It's just a perfect example of what to do with a poem. Okay, so it's titled Abandoned Bicycle. That's not very different than the other two poems as they were titled. But notice how we start out here, a bicycle, a nice one, has been locked to the lamppost all summer and fall. And now this aside here, it's not just a bicycle. We say it's a bicycle, a nice one. That aside is like it's the voice of the poet, the speaker, pulling the reader aside and sort of whispering in our ear. It's saying, I'm talking to you. It's that correction, that modification. He could have said a nice bicycle has been locked to the lamppost. But no, he said a bicycle, a nice one, has been locked to the lamppost. That makes it feel like he's talking to you intimately. He's modifying even what he says in the middle. He's correcting himself to make sure you, the reader, got the point of that. And that's so much a part of what voice is to have moments like that where we have special connection. And if you look through the poem, and we'll go through the poem in more depth, he does that repeatedly a few times. Every time we sort of get too locked in and it doesn't feel like we're intimately connected to the person speaking to us, he kind of pulls us back with a little aside like that. So that's one little trick that he uses here. As Dry Montito said, for George, the image of the bike raised questions. It was a starting point for exploring a whole world of possibilities that exist outside the poem. The AA poems didn't refer to anything. Yeah, almost breaking the fourth wall, says Morgan Feeney. With that aside, so a bicycle, a nice one, has been locked to the lamppost all summer and fall. And then we get descriptions. It's not just a generic bike post. A lamppost is already more detailed than we got with the first poem, which is on the side of the road. Here it's locked to a lamppost, and we get that nice alliteration too. There's nice sounds, but ChatGPT can do sounds too. But we have the detail of the lamppost, but then we get a lot more detail. The other one had its seat was torn, but here tires gone flat, and then this wonderful line, a congregation of leaves worshiping the wheels. And really, one of the things that we love about poems is really looking at the world, And we could say, the wheels were covered in leaves. And that's an easy way to say it. It's true. It's a description. It's better than saying nothing where we don't sort of get a sense of the scene. But really, what does that feel like? Using metaphor, making that a unique, interesting image that's going to stick with us. It's not just the leaves are there. It's a congregation of leaves worshiping the wheels. It's just a wonderful line, but those are the kind of details. It's that noticing the world and describing it in fresh ways that are really paying attention. And that's the thing that we love about poetry. And that's why that the descriptions here work really well. If we go back to description, he's building this image, this scene, sort of layer by layer in your conscious mind. And on the brake levers and the tiny bolts that held the seat exactly where someone wanted to be, rust is constructing its sprawling embassies. And so he takes this sort of lofty feeling of the leaves being a congregation, and he turns the rust into sprawling embassies. So it's another great description, another instance of really noticing and really fine detail. That's the kind of thing. And we want, I'm sure, I have zero doubt, that George Bilguer actually saw this bicycle. He walking down the street, saw this bicycle. It made him feel something he didn't quite understand. He dug in as deeply as he could to the actual image that he saw in his memory, trying to figure out why it meant something to him. And that means being a witness in this fine detail, that then passing that along to us. Okay, but the description continues. Maybe a drunk drifted. So he goes, he describes it like that. And he could have just said, again, he could have said tiny bolts were covered in rust, but no, he describes it this way, really getting into a depth about it. And then here we move on to imagined possibilities, which is what you would do. He's like, I wonder who left that bicycle. And then he doesn't say, I started to wonder who left that bicycle. He just jumps right in. He jumps right past the telling us what's happening and just shows us what's going on in his mind. So he doesn't say, I thought of all the possibilities that could have happened where somebody left this bicycle. That's how you get really wordy poems that don't connect as well. Part of that leaning in and saying, as he did at the top, a nice one, is letting us, giving it to us straight what's actually in the mind as he's processing this, and going right immediately to maybe a drunk drifted over yellow lines. A clot formed in the thigh and moved north, or somebody just got sick and tired. And so there's 3 possibilities of how the bicycle got there, but they're just laid out one by one, a little list of that. Anyway, and again, here's one of these asides. He realizes he's sort of been going on too long, is sort of what he's telling us with that anyway. It's the same thing as a nice one. It's that kind of aside, that friendly, jovial voice that's pulling us in. You don't have to write with a friendly, jovial voice like George Bilguer does and is known for. But having a voice that's a consistent voice that's doing something is really important. And in this poem, and a lot of George's work, it's being a friend and confidant, and having, he's telling you intimately what's going on in his mind. And he's realizing here that he could go on longer with this list of reasons why. And it's kind of boring to think of all the possibilities that aren't actually probably the reason the bike got left there. So he says, anyway, the bike is waiting. And then he goes back to a description a little bit just to pull you back toward the image, to remind you what we're looking at. The metals gleam urgently. And then he thinks again, not just what happened in the past, but what's going to happen in the future. Soon the scavengers will come. The petals, unable to live without each other, will vanish into a fresh new marriage. And again, it's digging into that concept. Scavengers will come, and he's imagining first they're going to take a pedal because they're missing a pedal. Their pedal broke on their bike, so they're going to take one. He doesn't just describe it that way. He thinks more about what that would be for a pedal. Like, he's putting himself empathetically into the spot of a pedal. What's it like to always have this partner over here? Now I have a new partner. That's like a fresh new marriage, And so he's pushing that image, like drilling into what he saw, that little scene he witnessed for a second. He's really diving deep into the poetry and the image that he witnessed to find the meaning for it, which is what we're trying to do with poems. The seat will disappear into a seat-shaped abyss. One night, someone will help himself to a wheel, not quite a bicycle, but a start. So he's going through, what's going to be picked away from this bicycle. And the bike, like an abandoned person, and only here does he get to any kind of sense of what the symbolic meaning of the poem is, that feeling that it's tied to the loneliness of feeling abandoned yourself, and how, friends disappear and the scavengers pick through your stuff, And the bike, like an abandoned person, will become a clock, calibrated to measure the precise duration of loneliness. And so the real insight, it's not that the bicycle represents loneliness. It's that you could use something like that to record loneliness. It's like a measuring tool for loneliness. It's a leap of understanding that really works. And it really pushes way beyond the initial impulse to write the poem. As Rose Lenard said, killer ending. And so those are the things that go into a great poem. And that's what we should all be trying to do, is writing great poems. And what they do, they set a scene, they let us see the scene, they have specific details, they focus on really minute things that expand our connection to that scene, and then they think about it, then they dive in deeper to the meaning. And just so much focusing on the image and letting that tell the story, not telling us what the story should mean. And really, so many poems tell the story of what the poems are about. And that's the problem. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah. So I'm just reading some of the comments. Yeah, it's just a great poem. But note how it's a great poem that if you just broke it down to a description of what it's about, it's kind of boring and cliche, right? I mean, an abandoned bicycle is lonely. My loneliness is like an abandoned bicycle. Like you could summarize it in that sentence, and that's what ChatGPT was doing, just stretching that out. And that's what so many poems that are submitted are doing. They have an idea, which is interesting, and trying to share that idea instead of exploring that idea. And we really want to push farther and explore that more. Okay, so that was half an hour talking about that. Hopefully this is helpful. That's just generally, if you want to write poems that people will read, it's really important to read poems. There's so many submissions we get, and everybody can attest. It's clear that the folks haven't read a whole lot of poems before writing their own. And it's really important that you find what you actually want to listen to, find what you find connection with, and read a lot of those and incorporate those, figure out what they're doing and incorporate that into what you're writing. Rosenar says with this, most of the vocab is very simple, so the words that aren't stand out. Embassies, congregation. Yeah. So anyway, I thought it would be a fun exercise. Also, if you're watching this video because you were sent here, because, we didn't want to go into depth on the poems that you sent, you can look back at any real critique of the weeks and just follow here regularly. We're fun. We like each other. There's a great group of people, 60 people watching live right now. Everyone's wonderful poets that just want other poets to get better too. We all want to get better as we go through this. So keep writing, keep reading, especially. That's, if you ask in an interview, that's always the number one piece of advice any poet will give if you want to become a better poet. Read. They all read a lot. Developing that sense of that large language model of your own, and also just learning how to explore the world in that way through creative linguistic imagination. So I really hope this is helpful. We're going to look at some other poems and do more traditional critiques. Yeah. So Kimberly Gibson Trent says, fun concept, but a bit demoralizing in practice, if I'm honest. I want to believe I'm helping someone who cares about the drafted lines. Yeah. I could have, held someone's poem up, but I didn't want to do that, and single somebody out for these kind of things. But just the main thing, this has been a lesson in show, don't tell. And that's just a key, set up a context, build a story, build a scene, build images, let us enter that scene, and then worry about us figuring out and letting us figure out what that means. And then it'll get so much farther. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on. And we said we were going to do Danette Burmia's poems first. I think we'll do something like this, and hopefully I'll get better at it over time. But I think maybe like once every 3 months or so, and I'll refer a bunch of people to these videos as we go, and we'll do different poems and stuff like this. I think it's useful. Anyway, Danette Burmia. Let me see. Oops, hang on a second. Submittable refresh. Let's see. Critique of the week. Submissions. Hang on. Okay. So Danette Burmia sent this in, way back in March. Sorry for the wait, Danette. I did not see that in the queue. But this is Before the Alarm, is poem number 1. 2 general questions. Does the imagery fully support thematic ideas? And are the thematic ideas clear throughout each poem? Okay, so we're going to get into traditional critiques of this. And unlike the first 2 poems we were looking at, there is an author who would like some advice on how these poems work. We're not just talking in generalities anymore. But here we go. Before the Alarm. Let's take a look at this. Before the Alarm. And again, this is Danette Burmia, who is here right now from San Marcos, Texas. All right. Before the Alarm. Before rising, neither awake nor asleep, one side a soft snore, the other a gentle purr, dream remnants swirl in my head and heart before movement, news and calendars take over, before outside machine noises assume control. In my comfortable, sleepy meadow of dew, where purple bloomed iris stalks rise above ground fog, I listen. Drowsy, hovering bees prop open this liminal space with their honey to buzz for a few more minutes to hear breathing, purring. Cellophane wings brush a creak, causing my eyelashes to flutter. I absorb the life around me, not only mine or my species. Before entering blurred friction and the hard, scary work of gear engaging gear unnerved by disaster and the machine's heartache, a squirrel disappears under tires, a child falls in a shooting spree. I avoid being shaken awake. Yeah. All right, so I just look at the comments. So before the alarm, so here we set the stage pretty well. We know where we are. The poem's grounded in the moment. Before the alarm, and then is the title, and then before rising, neither awake nor sleep. One side a soft snore, the other a gentle purr. Dream remnants swirl in my head. So it's that space between sleeping and waking in the morning as you wake up. Tom Barlow says quite the turn in the poem. Yeah, we'll go through a little bit more slowly and carefully. Before outside machine noises assume control. In my comfortable, sleepy meadow of dew, where purple-bloomed iris stalks rise above ground fog, I listen. To me, I think it's a little slow getting into itself. Yeah. So Shape of Soup says, the imagery is actually good, but there's more telling than necessary. Yeah. And Dick Westerhammer says, wouldn't it be great to in the beginning, get a sense of, or a glimpse of the dream, and let that push the poet in a surprising direction. Yeah. And Morgan Feeney says, a bit purple prosy for me. Some nouns like honeyed buzz just don't need adjectiving. Yeah. And James Spencer says, between liminal, one side, other side, neither. The poem doesn't move past this idea quickly enough. Yeah, that's my sense of it. So these first like three stanzas sort of should be one, I think, and maybe half the length. And I like the idea of getting some of the dream itself in there too, to get some more surprising imagery. To get just something unusual there. So we're sort of describing this in between area and state. But we're sort of just describing it repeatedly instead of sort of moving along. So in my comfortable sleepy meadow of dew, where purple bloomed iris stalks rise above ground fog. See, I think I would cut the things like, and this is the purple prose that someone was referencing. I would cut things like purple bloomed and just let them be iris stalks, and little things like that to strip out over detail. Drowsy, hovering bees prop open this liminal space with their honeyed buzz for a few more minutes. So again, I think, the honeyed buzz is a little bit too description-y. I'm trying to think about how you can cut this to like one line, but that's the kind of thing that I think doing here. It gets slowly into it, and I think we could speed that up. Kimberly Gibson Trans says, I like it too, but would tighten to before machines assume control, which is up above here. But yeah, so there's just always a little bit too much sort of clutter and wordiness. We want to get more, like we're establishing a scene and we just want to get into it really. And I think we linger there without having a purpose for a lot of the lingering, Let's see, with her honeyed buzz for a few more minutes to hear breathing, purring. Cellophane wings brush a cheek, causing my eyelashes to flutter. I absorb the life. So what are the cellophane wings? I was a little confused by that. Causing my eyelashes to flutter. I absorb the life around me, but only mine or my species. So the details here, I think the breathing and purring, I assumed there was like a human in bed on one side and a cat on the other, but it's a little bit unclear what's being described here. The cellophane wings, I'm not sure what they are. They brush a cheek, causing my eyelashes to flutter, which I can see that. I absorb the life around me, not only mine or my species. It's just, I guess this is a telling kind of line instead of a showing. but like where like remember how George in that poem, and it's really nice to have this to jump back to. Remember how he jumped right into the possibilities of how the bicycle got there and didn't say, I think about all the ways that could have brought the bicycle here. You're already showing that you absorb the life around you. So you don't need to say I'm absorbing the life around me. You just do it. Like Nike, just do it, So jump right in and just have the stuff happen. Okay. Before entering blurred friction and the hard, scary work of gear engaging gear, unnerved by disaster and the machine's heartache, a squirrel disappears under tires. A child falls in a shooting spree. I avoid being shaken awake. Yeah. And so, again, this is the turn. It's sort of like one of those famous, I have wasted my life, the lying on the McDuffie's farm. You really don't see that ending come. And I think that works as a poem. It's a poem that has movement. It goes somewhere surprising. And I would guess that Danette didn't realize this is the place the poem was going until it did. And that's the kind of thing that really works in a poetry. That's what a poem is. It's a tool to get under there. It's a mind tool. It's a mantra. And what that is, it's a way to get under the thing that you're thinking about, because the surface of your thoughts is really shallow and it's concretized. It's following sort of the same patterns by rote. It's that kind of memorizing 7 times 3 is 21 without even thinking about it, And getting underneath that to the feeling beneath the thing is what really works. And so, so ending on these sort of surprising, sad things that are going on while you're lying in bed, I think works. Yeah. There's some disagreement about, whether or not the last line should be there. A squirrel disappears under tires. A child falls in a shooting spree. I avoid being shaken awake. And some people want to cut it. Some people don't. And I don't know. I think it works for me. I would keep that line. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just reading some of the comments. Morgan Feeney says, can we hybend this? And that's always a good question. Like, can you add a haiku at the end and make it a hybend and have a leap like that? And if you can, like, why not? Yeah. So Shivpreet Singh says, clarity of image is missing, so it's hard to wonder. Again, a George Bilguer poem is a hard act to follow. Well, it definitely is. But that's what we all should be aspiring to, is that kind of detail. And that kind of sense of movement in connection, like surprise and connection, I guess. Yeah. So I don't know. I really like the idea of getting something from the dream in there. I think that was Dick Westheimer's point. Getting some surprising details can emerge from that dream, and we can sort of evoke that liminal space between waking and sleeping by showing both those things in parallel without sort of describing what we're doing as much. And then getting from that into the ending, which I think works as a nice, Volta-like leap at the end. I think that works. So I think that's the direction I would go with this one. Oops, sorry, I didn't see the note that came after. So she didn't even want us to look at that. Danette, sorry about that. She wanted Bud Guts instead, but we went through before the alarm. Sorry about that. Let's take a look instead. We'll look at the other poem from Danette, which is this, Perspective. Okay, Perspective. $10 billion, 30 years, 344 single points of failure, creating myriad potentials for collapse in an interdependent process. Every James Webb Space Telescope engineer shouldered 7 tons of responsibility. A successful launch, relief in the firing room. JWST now orbits Earth and Sun weightlessly, though imperfectly. Rockets thrust correct for drift. My mind's firing room can incite its own possibly infinite crisis under an iron core's weighty crush. Regrets and second guesses, these heaviest of elements drain my fuel, preparing for supernova. I stand beneath stars, seeking perspective from their organized chaos. Finding Polaris tonight reminds me that only our vantage point makes it a pole star. We've had others as Earth wobbles. When cosmic vertigo sets in, I feel infinitely smaller, yet significantly lighter. Deep breaths remind me that I, too, am an object in space. So here, I think, again, we have a nice sense of the structure, sort of like the Abandoned Bicycle type poem. It is these things make me think of my position in life right now, in my emotional state. And the poem is called Perspective, which is an interesting title too, I say, as far as one-word titles go. Kimberly Gibson Trent says I like the ending. Jamie Thomas says, even as a numbers person, the beginning is making me stumble a lot. Maybe spell them out. James Spencer, I would love to hear about other pole stars from different eras. And Rose Leonard says, I like the sense of being let into someone else's world and experiences. Yeah, I think that my favorite part of that is how intimately the speaker here knows the details of the James Webb Space Telescope, how many tons, the inside information, the things that I don't know being shared with me feel really nice. I like that aspect of it. Doug Van Hooser says, the beginning drew me in because I wanted to know what the poem was about. Okay, so perspective. Again, $10 billion. We're going to read it more slowly in finer detail. $10 billion, 30 years, 344 single points of failure, creating myriad potentials for collapse in an interdependent process. I don't know. I'm trying to think if there's a better way to say that. Myriad potentials for collapse in an interdependent process. It's kind of a mouthful, but you kind of almost have to say that. It does feel fit with a technical jargon kind of going on. Every James Webb Telescope engineer shouldered 7 tons of responsibility. Oh, that's an interesting, yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, let the numbers stand. I do too. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so Tom Barlow says, was it Tom Barlow? No, it was James Spencer says, I like the words 344 potentials for collapse. Yeah, I think that maybe, but yeah. Instead of 344 single points of failure, what about 344 potentials for collapse, to condense it that way? Noah Drashuk says, this is just me, but I would like to see the delicateness, the frailty of the operation demonstrated in the form of the poem itself. Dick Westheimer says, too many multisyllabic words for me, contrast the complex with simpler language. Yeah, good advice from Dick as always. Okay, so a successful launch, relief in the firing room, JWST. So this was hard to say as an acronym. It's not one of the ones you can read. And it took me a second as I was reading the first time to realize it was talking about the James Webb Space Telescope. So, and it's one of those cases I would just say the telescope now orbits Earth. Like, go to the generic. The telescope now orbits Earth and Sun weightlessly, though imperfectly. Rocket thrusts correct for drift. This is a very nice. See how this is the kind of sentence that works really nicely in contrast, like Dick was talking about, with all the polysyllabic sort of technical words. Yeah. Okay, my mind's firing room can incite its own possibly infinite crisis under an iron core's weighty crush. To me, I think this one, I like going in that direction, but again, it's pretty sort of clunky and wordy again. My mind's firing room. I guess the word, it's like forcing it on us instead of like letting the thought emerge, I mean, even if we dropped the, what if we just went right to the actual sort of metaphor itself and dropped the jargon from this point, My mind too could incite its own crises, under the, like go in that direction. Yeah, so that's what Kimberly Gibson Tran just said. I incite my own infinite crises might be a more fun turn. And then Morgan Feeney, yeah, that's the problem too. The iron core parallel to the Earth's core, not really grasping the metaphor for sure. Yeah. Okay. Regrets and second guesses, these heaviest, I think there should be a comma there, by the way. These heaviest of elements drain my fuel, preparing for supernova. Yeah. And so I think the thing is, we're pushing the comparison too far into the language of what it is. I think if we went sort of back and forth between the mind and the technical stuff, which is really interesting on its own, I think that works a lot better than saying this is this and using that direct metaphor, because we sort of get the point, but then it becomes sort of too much at the same time. Yeah. I stand beneath stars, seeking perspective from their organized chaos. And again, I guess the thing too is we don't really get any details about life, about my life feeling like that. We stay, I guess maybe that's the problem with staying with all the firing room language and terminology, is that we don't get a sense of the real world that we're comparing that to. So maybe it's a chance to turn into that direction. I stand beneath stars, seeking perspective from their organized chaos. Finding Polaris tonight reminds me that finding Polaris tonight reminds me that only our vantage point makes it a pole star. We've had others as Earth wobbles. And somebody pointed out that is interesting. There's some things I think we could go into more depth for, and this is one of them. I think we could, as somebody said, talk about the firing room a little bit more too, and describe that so we get to really see what that is. So that's a place to expand. Yeah, Rose Leonard says, I love this bit about the pole star. And I mean, it is fascinating that we've had other stars like that. And even I think, some monuments are aligned to different ones because they're that old, which is fascinating. Göbekli Tepe and whatnot. There's an interesting visual juxtaposition, this is Kimberly Gibson Tran, of the room of astronomers and the poet under the open stars. Yeah, that's interesting too. I think if we got sort of more depth in that unique understanding we have of the firing room and all that, with more personal detail, and let those two sort of stand side by side. A great poet to look at that is David Kirby, who he does what he calls the braids, where he weaves different stories together, and going back and forth. You can see how he transitions to them, but a lot of poems do that, like by going forward and back in time. But having two sections where one thing is taking place in the science-y NASA room, and the other is the stories of the parts of my life that feel that chaotic. I think if we got a view of that, it would really work. Yeah. I'll keep reading. The cosmic vertigo sets in. I feel infinitely smaller, yet significantly lighter. Deep breaths remind me that I, too, am an object in space. Yeah. Shape of Soup says, stark, analytical parallel would be compelling, but you can't mix metaphor or imagery. Conflation creates more confusion than clarity. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right, well, let's move on. Thanks for sharing these. There's two poems by Danette Burmia. And let's try to get to one more poet before we go. Oops. Hang on. I have to change the way I do this slightly, too. Okay. Actually, you know what we'll do? Because Danette did ask and I missed it. Maybe we should read Bug Guts instead. And it is, the hour is up. We'll read Bug Guts instead. Let me pull this up. This was the poem she wanted us to read instead of the other one. And since Danette is a regular here, we want to help you as much as we possibly can here. So I will take this and put Bug Guts in. We'll look at that poem too. Oop, let me do it this way. Hang on. Okay, here's Bug Guts. Right here. Okay, Bug Guts. Again, this is Danette Bermia. Mary King says, Tim, have you used ChatGPT to critique a poem? Oh, yeah, it's useful to analyze like your own poems. It is. It's worth it. There's some understanding that you get out of it. Not that it actually understands, but it can help elucidate some things. Anyway, Bug Guts is the title. Bug Guts. And I do like the title. There's something kind of, James Spencer says, terrific title. Bug Guts. Back roads, the radio plays country music oldies. Hank and Patsy, then KCLW, just arrange broadcasts. The 8 a.m. farm report followed by Bob Will's brand of country swing, a local daily anthem. Open fields dotted with cedar oaks, prickly pear, and tall grasses are lit with bright morning light. Poking my kid self over the front seat, kneeling on the hump of the drive shaft, I sing along with Mama and Daddy on the radio. Hey, hey, good looking. Splat, the first grasshopper hits the windshield, and yellowish green guts fan out like a cartoon blast. Spraying washer fluid erases all but a smudge. Before I can speak, Daddy's ready with his old joke. I bet he doesn't have the guts to do that again. We howl like always, splat, laugh, splat, chuckle, splat. When I drive that same route today, more cedars and prickly pears, purple tunas thrive, but wilt his grayed live oaks. New custom-built homes on subdivided ranch lands pop up like grass seed. Expensive fences and ranch gates replace leaning posts of twisted, rusty barbed wire. Grasshopper strikes so frequent the car needs hosing down are almost as rare as grasshoppers exploding on the glass. But after an intermittent splat, I turn on my wipers and remember Daddy's jokes. Whether he did it with a country boy's indifference or to lessen my disgust that seeing insides visible at high impact, I don't know. Something, maybe a butterfly, collides with the windshield, and another wisecrack rises from memory. What was the last thing that went through that bug's mind? We know the answer, but let him say it. His butt. All right. So, so that's interesting. I think, let's see. Let's see. Jamie Thomas says, I feel confused about the grasshopper line. Sorry, I'm looking at the details. Yeah, so for me, I think there's really great details in this poem. There's good images. It paints a scene really well. We're sort of riding along as we sing. I think it goes a little bit too far in the ending. I think really all three of these poems could use more tightening. We had that sort of concept of the purple prose, which is not a phrase we use much, but it is maybe we should use more with which is just adding sort of unnecessary description, sort of fluffing a poem up. And that happens a little bit. And some things linger a little too long, I would say. And I think we can get the poem to be tighter and conciser, and it would have more impact, no pun intended. But I really like the descriptions. I like the turn, too. There's a really nice turn where we go from this memory into the future. When I drive that same route today, so that's the good aspects of the poem. And the title, which you already mentioned, is fun. Let's read it again slowly. Backroads, the radio plays country music oldies, Hank and Patsy. Then KCLW, just in range, broadcast the 8 a.m. farm report, followed by Bob Will's brand of country swing, a local daily anthem. So the details there are really nice. It's not too much detail, but it provides the sense of actually being there. So I'm trying to block the sun a little bit. It really brings to life that memory. It's just the right amount of specificity, I think, to evoke that sort of intimate feeling that we're really talking about something real, and sort of build the descriptions of how the music are working. So we feel like we're there, but it doesn't go too far. So that's really nice. Open fields dotted with cedar, oaks, prickly pear, and tall grasses are lit with bright morning light. I like the details there. I would say if you could find a better way to say or lit with bright morning light, a little more interesting way maybe, you could do that. But I like the detail too. Poking my kid self over the front seat, kneeling on the hump of the drive shaft, I sing along with Mama and Daddy and the radio. Hey, good looking. Splat. The first grasshopper hits the windshield. And so that splat, comes suddenly and it works well. I guess maybe the yellowish green. We don't need that much description of the color. The yellow guts fan out like a cartoon blast. I think that works. Spraying washer fluid. I think I would just say washer fluid erases all but a smudge. You don't need the spraying. It's already there, kind of. It's already a sentence fragment. So you might as well keep it concise. Before I can speak, Daddy's ready with his old joke again. Old joke. I bet he doesn't have the guts to do that again. I think I would probably cut this. Or maybe just leave the we howl like always. But then, that it goes on again and again. I think I would cut that part. And just go to when I drive the same route today, more cedars and prickly pears. Purple tunas thrive. I think going back to the list here, this is where it starts to get a little bit too much description. And I think that there are more cedars and prickly pears. It makes us try to remember what was up here at the top. And that's just sending our mental energy in a meaningless direction, I think. But wilt is grayed live oaks. I think maybe you could just sort of summarize that most of the trees are there, but the wilt is grayed the live oaks, so it's a little different. New custom-built homes on subdivided ranch lands pop up like grass seed. One of the things, they don't actually pop up like grass seed. They pop up like the grass. So there's sort of a technically something, wrong with that metaphor. And new custom-built homes on subdivided ranch lands is a bit clunky. So I think there's a smoother way to say this, although I like we're seeing the change in the present time. Expensive fences and ranch gates replace leaning posts of twisted, rusty barbed wire. I think that the twisted rusty is one of those too many adjectives. You don't really need that. We kind of assume. Grasshopper strikes so frequent the car needs hosing down are almost as rare as grasshoppers exploding on the glass. And again, I think that gets too rare. So we get into this, and I think you can kind of feel within poems when they're sort of moving between modes in the mind, and so we got to this turn, and it's almost like a dog that caught the car situation. We kind of don't know what to do with it. And then we get into this more wordy voice. We're sort of spinning our wheels trying to figure out where we wanted to go with this. And so I think that's why we see a lot of sort of clutter to clean out and a lot of things that are expressed in a very clunky, long-winded way. Grasshopper strikes so infrequent the car needs hosing down are almost as rare as grasshoppers exploding on the grass. Yeah, that's a lot. But after an intermittent, you could just say that really quickly and simply, and we get the point. But after an intermittent splat, I turn on my wipers. So you could just even say grasshopper strikes are less frequent. But after an intermittent splat, I turn on my wipers and remember Daddy's jokes. Whether he did it with a country boy's indifference or to lessen my disgust, it's seeing. I think you could cut that too. It's seeing insides visible at high impact. I don't know. You just say lessening my disgust. We understand what you're talking about at that point. Something, maybe a butterfly collides with a windshield. Another wisecrack rises from memory. Instead of another wisecrack rising from memory, it's one of those things where it's like don't say what you're about to do. Just do it. Like we saw in those early poems we were talking about. Just think, and I say out loud to no one, Dad's last joke or whatever. What was the last thing that went through that bug's mind? We know the answer, but let him say it. His butt. Yeah. Let me see. And now the sun is like right at the wrong spot. Okay. Shivpreet Singh says, my advice is to think about a fixed number of lines, 10, 12, 14, and try to say everything you are in those many lines without looking at the poem. It will help you be more creative. Try it, yeah. That's a good suggestion. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, ooh, a butterfly is a different imprint than a splat. Kind of want that image. Yeah, that's a good point. Morgan Feeney says, is this a comment on the fact that insect populations are in decline now due to climate change? I'm a bit lost. And Danette agrees, yes, it is. So how does that tie together? I'm just really... is it the wrong spot? It'll be gone in a second. But jeez. Anyway, we'll just go like this. Yeah, how can you tie that together in a way that... that works. So if we get the reference to the declining insect population, and we get this story remembering, I guess the father is sort of whimsy about it and indifference in a way too. Can we make that connection stronger? Yeah, as I guess folks are talking about it too. Rosenard says, ending on that line makes it feel like the point of the poem is Dad's joke, but actually I think the point is the decimation of insect populations, so I think it needs a different ending. Yeah, and I could see how the ending, though, if... What was the last thing that went through that bug's mind? We know the answer, but let him say it. His butt. It feels like there could be another statement here at the end that sort of ties the poem together. Yeah. Well, the problem, so Tim Campbell says, Tim, you need better blinds. We have these like arched windows that don't have blinds, like at the top of the windows, in this office, and it's right there at this time of day. I mean, it's probably a good reason to, I think last year I put other pillows up there. Rosenard says that the poem takes the first exit ramp. Yeah, I think that's good. I think we could explore this topic more. We set it up really well. Okay, now I'm over it. We set it up really well, and but we could go deeper. Yeah. Okay. Just hang on a second. I got to deal with it. All right, that's a little better. Okay. Yeah. Well, a lot of great suggestions here, and thanks everybody for sharing them. I think that's going to wrap up the critique for this week. Pinpope says a visor. Tim could wear a visor. Yeah. My sun mask is my Halloween costume. Yeah. Lisa Seidenberg says, I don't know what this poem is actually about. And I think that's the issue. I think it's set up. There are these two things, which is a great thing to have for a poem. It's like the grist for a poem, which is having, it's the decline of the bug population and how this relates to Dad and his jokes and this fond memory I have of them, of how many there were. How do you tie that together in a way that feels meaningful? And I think you have to explore deeper. It's maybe the father's joviality but indifference that's there, and maybe not wanting to talk about it. Is the reason why the poem didn't continue and sort of took the exit ramp because you don't really want to go there. But anyway, I think there's a real interesting fuel for a poem here. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trent says the theme is there, imprinting on memory. Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up the critique. Really hope this was helpful to Danette. Hopeful it was helpful to everybody else who had that little lesson at the beginning of the show in the first half. And hopefully this is a way we can get through a lot more submissions to the critique of the week. Thanks everybody for being here. Let me remind you, the guest coming up on the Rattlecast is going to be, actually I gotta say first I'd tell you that the new Poetry Space just came out. That's Katie Dozier's podcast that I co-host with her. She produces. We did an episode late last night, comparing one of our duels, comparing two other literary magazines. Check that out if you dare. Didn't go all that well. But we're trying to give our honest opinions about things. Yeah. Now, next week's guest on the Rattlecast coming up is going to be J.R. Salanche. Now, J.R. is a brilliant poet. We've published him in, I think, 5 issues of Rattle. Always wonderful poems. Some of my favorites, like The Lover of Stone, is a poem I really love that comes to mind. He's actually got a 6th poem coming up in a forthcoming issue as well. He's the author of 40 books of poetry, but kind of reclusive relatively. I haven't been able to find any interviews with him online or anything like that. I like to read a few beforehand. But a really prolific author, professor, retired upstate New York, I think. J.R. Salanche. His newest book is Barren Road. That's his 40th. So it should be really fun getting to know him better, finding out how poems tick for him, and getting to hear a lot of great work. That's J.R. Salanche, the guest. The prompt for this week was to... pull that one up. The prompt this week was to invent a form that borrows something you love about an existing form but spins it in a new direction. So that's your prompt this week. I'm taking off and helping you with an upcoming tribute section for Rattle, which is to an issue we're going to have dedicated to invented forms. So invent your own forms by spinning it off some other form. That's your prompt for this week. The guest, once again, J.R. Salanche. Hope you have a great Halloween. Hope you have a great weekend. And we'll talk to you then. See you on Monday, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, November 3rd. Goodbye.